Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz with another edition of our podcast series. And today I'm proud to be interviewing Natalie Sharma. Natalie is the founder and creator of Pixel Studios here in Jackson, Mississippi. And she's also definitely an advocate for women in the industry. So, she's done a lot in graphic design, which is a new topic for us. We really haven't talked about or talked to any web designers and graphic designers. So it'll be interesting to see what she has. And then she's also a regular volunteer tech expert at the Bean Path, and we'll ask her a little bit about that. And she hosts a couple local meetup groups too for women in tech. So Natalie, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me. You pretty much hit the nail on the head. I'm a Jackson native. I've been interested in design and technology since I was about 3 years old. So this is not a new subject for me. The advocacy is a little bit newer, but pretty much I've been doing this kind of all my life. I've been preparing for a career in design since I was, 3 or 4 years old. So that's pretty much me.
We've had other podcasts where we talk about digital natives and how a lot of the younger generation now are coming up with literally devices in their hand. And so, it's interesting that you say that you've kind of wanted to do that since you were 3. Tell us about what part of the design part really intrigued you, or do you enjoy? Tell us a little bit about the design piece.
So my mother is actually an interior decorator, so I have learned the principles of design since a very young age. But for me, I think what really sold me on design is kind of how you take chaos and organize it. You create something out of nothing using different principles and assets. And what gets me going in the morning is, I basically take a theory, an idea, and just create something from it. And I'm kind of addicted to the act of creation. So to me, that's the best part about design is that, yes, you are creating something that looks good, but you're also solving a problem. And when it does both, it's pretty beautiful.
Oh, yeah. So tell us a little bit about kind of the steps. Like if you're going to work with somebody and you're going to start down the design path, tell us sort of the customers that you work with, what that process is like for people out there that are, considering maybe design as a career. Talk them through sort of what a normal day is and how that process evolves.
Good question. So the first thing that I do with a client before we ever start talking about the scope of the project or, really kind of any details, the first thing we do is we have a discovery call. I preface that with a pretty in-depth questionnaire because there are questions on there that if they don't know the answers to, they're really not ready to come to me yet. I am mostly focused on working with industry innovators and people who are kind of they're in the heat of it and they're growing their business and they kind of know what they need. And then they just need me to kind of gather everything, visualize it so they can take everything to the next level. So once we have the discovery call, I'll write up a custom proposal. They can accept it online. And usually I lay out step by step. So say, for example, for a web design project, we do things in order with little milestones. So that way the client always has the opportunity to say, hey, this direction isn't right. Let's kind of take a few steps back. It makes it a lot easier for everyone because if you get to the end and the client doesn't like anything about what you did, you got to start all over. It's a huge waste of time. So normally we start with our first milestone is we start with a mood board and just some general research, just trying to make sure, are we in the right ballpark? Are we playing the right sport? And from there, we would move from the mood board and research into a wireframe and some information architecture. So basically with information architecture, that's just laying out the sitemap, kind of figuring out what copy is going to go where. And then with the wireframe, we are just kind of laying some basic stuff out and saying, okay, how does this feel? Does this general look and feel work for you? And if it does, then we kind of move more into the fully fleshed out prototype stage, which is you normally build in Adobe XD. It's my favorite program. You can't convince me to use anything else. And after that, we'll move from either into building it in Webflow, which is what I do in-house, or if the client has custom needs, like for a certain platform, mostly WordPress. Clients tend to really like WordPress because it's what they know how to use. I will normally work with one of my partner developers to create a custom WordPress theme for them. And at that point, it's pretty much just handoff and training. Every project I do is very thorough in documentation. I don't believe in just handing the keys to someone and saying, okay, well, here you go. Have a nice life. I like to give full documentation. And so every project, when a client comes to me, I'm going to give you a guide on how to take this new asset and grow with it. And that includes, branding as well. But website design is so integral to a company that you really need a manual to make sure that you're using it correctly.
Sure. And websites evolve. It's not like you do it once and then you're done anyway.
Yeah.
Technology changes, websites change. Sometimes, you go onto somebody's website and you're used to working around a certain way, and then everything is in a different spot. And it does kind of keep the interest of the people clicking around to figure out how it works. But you definitely want to make sure that it's user friendly. And I think that it's important to work with designers and people that have done it before, just to make sure that you've got the right flow and things happen in a certain manner. Nobody wants to make 87 clicks on a website before they get to what they want. And it's important to get your message conveyed early, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. One of my good friends, or one of my designer friends, Paul Polvani, he actually did a presentation on branding not that long ago where he said confused customers don't buy. And that has really stuck with me, especially when I'm designing anything, because I have to ask myself, would a customer understand how to use this? And it's really important that whenever we're creating something that is customer facing, that we put ourselves in our customers' shoes, because they're going to be the ones using it. You can't let your own bias and your own preferences hold you back from delivering a good product to the customer, because if the customer can't use it, then your asset is worthless.
And that's a good point too. Just because you like it doesn't mean they're going to like it. Everybody has a different preference. And at the end of the day, it's still their business and their preference of what, however they want it to look. And so have you worked with a customer that really wanted something that you just thought was horrible?
Oh, yes. Many times. And I always like to say, I have to ask myself, is this a hill worth dying on? Sometimes it is, and it really depends. And I'm a big stickler with all the details. And the trick is, I can't let myself die on every hill, because if you die on every hill, then you're just going to kill the relationship with that client. So you really need to choose your battles. The biggest hill that I would choose to die on is probably, is this actually going to work and serve you? And if it's not, I'm going to fight you. But if it's just, I don't like this color, then I can't waste my energy on that, because we've probably got bigger issues to tackle.
Sure. And so a lot of the work, I think, is repeat work too, right? Once you start down a path, as you become somebody's designer, there is a lot of follow-on business. So it's not like a one and done thing for people that are considering this for a career, right?
Absolutely. I would say the bulk of my work is recurring client or retainer. People really like my kind of, let's look at everything at once kind of approach. And people like to have somebody they can trust. And what I've heard time and time again, when new clients come to me, they have horror stories of how a designer didn't set something up correctly for them or didn't give them everything they needed. And so what they really want is just someone they can trust. And I find that even if you feel personally as a designer that your work is not super up there, cream of the crop, like what you see on Dribbble or on Instagram, people still want to come back to you because they trust you and they know you're going to take care of them. And I would say recurring work is one of my biggest client base. And I'm happy to keep doing that. Retainer work is actually a very small part. Well, a good part of my work is partnering with firms, say for a software firm. Recently started partnering with a PR firm. So really, it's just about being a partner with another company. And I would say that's a big part of my work.
And behind the scenes, not just the pretty pictures and all that kind of stuff that goes along with the design, talk a little bit about search engine optimization and some of the other things that come into play in the coding piece. So obviously the pictures are one part, but talk a little bit about how coding comes into play and what languages you use and things like that to make it all come together.
So I would say I'm not really a developer myself. I do know how to use HTML and CSS. I am very much into building a site with no code. There's a very big no code movement right now, especially for designers, because we feel held back by what we can do in certain platforms. And that's kind of where Webflow has really been my savior. It's like, I understand how code works. I got the basics. I kind of understand HTML semantics, but I'm not a developer. I've tried, and it's just not my thing. I don't think my brain really works that way. So really, I use Webflow to kind of drag and drop and kind of build things out. But the code is still important. It does spit out clean code, but it is up to me to make sure that the site is optimal, not only for SEO, but as well as accessibility. And I've found that you can do all of that without having to know too much code. You just need to make sure that you take care to do those things. I mean, as far as SEO, basically a lot of it is just filling things out correctly and making sure that you have enough custom curated content. It's really not that difficult. You just kind of have to make sure to work on the details, such as setting up all of your meta tags and descriptions for every page. Make sure all of your open graph is set up and ready to go. And then as far as accessibility, a lot of it's just labeling. Just make sure that a screen reader can function on your screen. And, I have a few friends who are really focused on web accessibility, and it's just, don't be a jerk when you design. I think that comes down to the code too. So, putting, like I said, putting labels on everything and always making sure images have very good description. And I'm the worst at writing descriptions, not because they're not good, but because I want to write an essay about the image and how it looks.
And they don't read all that. Yeah.
So I try to keep it to like a sentence, which is difficult for me. I'm a little bit long-winded in case anybody hasn't noticed by now. But I would say the code, it's important to me, but it doesn't really come into play as much on my end. If I get into a situation where I'm in over my head, I will talk to one of my developer partners. And I like to go to that person's area of expertise. So for example, I've got a guy who is super awesome in Shopify and WordPress. So I would go to him specifically for those things. So what matters to me is that I'm playing to somebody's strengths when it comes to the coding. So if it's in Webflow, I got it. But if it's beyond that, then I'm going to go to somebody else who specializes in that language.
And that's a big part of this business, I think, too, is because nobody can know everything in this business. There's just so many nuances and pieces and parts, and partnering with folks that you can trust that can really step up to the plate and help with a lot of those issues is, I think, just absolutely key. And once you find good partners, you kind of stick with them because it's just the process of finding new ones. It's like dating. It just takes forever. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
I totally agree. And I'm not down on the idea of these platforms where you can kind of get your foot in the door and reach clients on kind of on a level where like the bar is not as high for you. But the danger that I see with clients going to websites, I'm going to call them out, Fiverr, or similar platforms where it's kind of a race to the lowest amount. The trouble that you run into is that person is not invested in your success. They're just there to throw something at you and get paid for it. And I think that especially when you're dealing with a company that is scaling up or you've got a lot of money coming in, you really need to invest in your technology partner as much as you do your own company. Because if you have a good partner, they're interested in your success, they care about it, and they're going to come at you with new ideas and new ways to innovate. And that's what is really important. And, I understand there's a time and place for one-off people, but if we chose our technology partners with a little bit more care, I think we would succeed a lot better in the long run.
Well, and I think there's a time and place for all of those. And to be fair, some of those websites, even though they're kind of quick one and done, there's a few. There's some that do logos. There's some that do all kinds of different things. Some use templates. Some actually will take the time to give you a nice looking logo. And those are good kicking off points, if you need to start with your branding. But I think overall branding is something that you touched on a little while ago, but let's talk about overall branding for a company and all of the different pieces and parts that go into that.
Absolutely. So I would say people tend to not understand what branding is. They get really hung up on the logo. The logo is just a very small part of what branding is. To me, branding is everything. I like to think about branding as a person, and the logo is the face. You are more than just a face. Obviously you have the rest of your body, but you also have thoughts and feelings and directives. And that's kind of how a company is. You have a mission, you have a purpose, you speak a certain way, you look a certain way. Every aspect of that company should reflect back to you, and you can't always slap a logo on everything because then it kind of defeats the purpose of having it. The logo is just a signifier of who you are, but it is not all of who you are. The brand is a collection of things that represent you. That could be colors, that could be patterns, that could be different types of photography. So brand is it's the whole thing. And, consider the logo just like the fancy sticker on top. And I would say that is the one thing I've seen time and time again. When people say branding, they just think about the logo and they don't really think about anything else. So I think it's really important that we all kind of think about not just the logo, but how do we sound? What are we trying to accomplish? Who do we serve? So I tend to look at it as all at once. I'm very thorough with these type of things. I feel that if you can't answer those questions, then you need to do that first before you start getting caught up in visuals. Because if you don't have the answers to those questions down, then you can't properly create a visual to capture that.
And what would you say is the one question that people sort of stumble on the most, that is the most challenging when you say, if you can't answer this question, then you're not quite ready? What is that, the hardest question, I guess?
I would say the hardest question that clients have answering is, what do you want to look like? Because yes, I know it's my job to figure that out, but having a frame of reference is so important. And I'm telling clients over and over, and I say, send me everything. I will look at all of it. I will read all of it, because I will find the patterns of why you identify with this, why you like this. And to me, that shows you've been looking and you're trying to figure out the landscape of what's out there. Because not only do we kind of want to sort of fit in the industry that you've chosen, we also want to take care that we know who your competitors are or your rivals, because we want to make sure that we might emulate some of the successful things they're doing, but we don't want to look like them. We want to make sure that we differentiate. So I would say the hardest, the hardest question that clients have answering is, what do you want to look like? Because they just think, well, that's your job, right?
Yeah. Well, that's like going to the hairstylist and saying, just cut it.
Yeah, I would say it's just like that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Bean Path and what that is.
Yes. So the Bean Path is a nonprofit organization started by Dr. Natalie. She is also a Jackson native. She currently lives in Atlanta working at Amazon, but she saw that in many communities in Jackson that technology was not, there was a gap between technology and children in learning how to use it. So I think that's where we started. So Dr. Natalie started the Bean Path as kind of an answer to seeing the gap between technology in our local communities. Technology was not really being taught as much in schools or being introduced at an age where I would say people felt that they could actually use it or consider a career in tech. She's a huge advocate for getting young people in a technology career or on that path. So the Bean Path is basically an organization where we go around from different locations and basically introduce technology to the public and help them with their tech problems. And that seems very trivial because you might think that's what tech support is for. But a lot of it is just showing people that they have the power to use technology and kind of giving them the confidence to not only use it, but also potentially consider a career. Because there is a very strong mental barrier of, well, I don't know how to use this, I can't do this. And so we try to take really hot topics such as, I would say apps is a huge one right now, building your own app, learning how to code. We take those topics, kind of make them a little bit more digestible and make them a little bit more approachable for everyone. And I think that's the main part of what we do. And I'm a local tech expert with the Bean Path. And so basically what I do, I go in my area of expertise, which would be mostly web and app design, but I also help with general technology. A lot of what we do is just helping people, even with their devices. Can you help me set up my phone? I want to share photos of, my grandkids or something like that. It's just really showing them that they have the power themselves to use technology and, they have it within them to do that.
And that's really good. We've had several experts on the show talking about kids in tech and how different it is for this new generation that's born in tech, but a lot of their parents don't understand it, and just the exposure. And most kids are going to decide what they do as a career by the age of 7. And that's based on all of the experience and all of the exposure that they've had at a really young age. And even kids that are older, many times, nobody gets a 4-year degree in 4 years anymore.
No.
It's almost 5 years. Because a lot of people change majors because they're exposed to different things at a collegiate level. And the more you can expose kids and people to, the better off you are. And the other side of that is, you have to have parents that can help kids with homework and that don't view a phone or a device as a babysitter or a nuisance that actually view that as something that can bring about a better future. You know, at one time, Jackson was the telecommunications capital of the United States, and we were fifth in the nation in supercomputing power. And a lot of those tech jobs, quite simply, have left. And it's really sad, I think, to see what that market used to be to what that market is today. And it's definitely gone backwards for sure.
See, I didn't even know any of that. And that's the sad part. I've lived in Mississippi my entire life, and I didn't know any of that.
Well, you were probably just a babes back then.
It's funny because I was just exposed to technology at a young age. You know, I've been using a computer since I was 3 years old. And I'm not saying that I was building a computer or doing programming or using the terminal. I was not. I was just playing computer games. My grandfather was the president of a insurance company, and he saw that technology was very important. So he told himself, I'm going to buy a computer for all of my grandchildren. So every family got their own computer that he bought for us. And I remember using it at 3 years old, you know, playing games like Peter Rabbit or Putt Putt, you know, games for children. But
Sure.
it fostered a huge interest in me in technology. And I love tech. I'm a huge nerd. And, you know, to that point, my dad is a huge tech head as well. He is very hardware. He built his own surround sound system before surround sound existed. He hooked up speakers to my crib as a baby. And I just thought that was so funny. And it's just so interesting how my life has been shaped by that. And I think I'm rare that I knew kind of what I wanted to do at a very, very young age. It's not the same for everybody. I mean, I always use my husband as an example. He was always interested in coding, but he got his degree in English. And now he's a software engineer. He would code at his parents' store in between customers. And, you know, now he's team lead at his company for front-end development. So, you know, we all come from different paths of life. And I never tell anybody that getting a degree in design is the right choice, because it's not for everyone. It took me 5 years to get mine, but for me, it taught me discipline. If I had tried to do design without going to college, I think I would have crashed and burned pretty hard. And it's not because I didn't know what I was doing. I know how to use the technology. I know the principles of design. That's not the issue. It's having the discipline to complete a project and the wherewithal to communicate with the client and make sure they understand everything that's happening.
Yeah, we've talked several times on this show with different people about how technology really evolves and how there's different paths to learning. And some people definitely learn better in a college atmosphere. But you take companies like Apple, 50% of their employees now are not degreed. They're doing skills-based hiring and fostering that skill set and changing it. And, you know, the work that you're doing through the Bean Path and a lot of these schools where technology isn't a focus, kids are learning on their own and they're learning outside, and just that discipline to learn that way and to pick things up, I think should be rewarded. And I think we don't do a good enough job of that. You know, we don't value trades as an education, and a lot of people get 2-year degrees in coding in different languages. And definitely there's other paths to learning. On-the-job training is certainly one of them. The apprenticeship programs that you see in a lot of like electrical and things like that, I think is another way that we can bring some of those tech skills to areas that don't have that as college, or where somebody has to be a caregiver and is trying to get a career at the same time. You know, it's not always that easy. And depending on the roles and needs of that, you know, women tend to get hurt by that more than men do. So I'm glad that, you know, the degree worked out for you. And I certainly encourage everybody to get one if you can. But, you know, there's lots of considerations. And I think employers that offer degrees as a perk, it's not really a perk if you only hire people with a degree, right? So there's some meeting in the middle. And I think, you know, exposing kids at a young age, like what you're doing, the Bean Path, and getting that technology exposure to folks really is key in helping shape a lot of these careers in the next generation. I know even the Girl Scouts now have a tech badge, and I think the Boy Scouts do too. But just, you know, that exposure I think is absolutely critical.
Yes. And I would say that once we, you know, start getting them interested, I would say the next best step is one of my other favorite organizations is the Mississippi Coding Academies. And it's such a great local program where they take, young coders, normally about the age of a high school graduate or older. They kind of vary in age, but I would say normally it's like right after high school. They say, I'm not really interested in a college degree. That's not what I want to do. The Mississippi Coding Academies is a completely free nonprofit program that turns a junior coder into a full stack front end developer in 11 months. And it's 5 days a week. I think it's 9 to 5, so it's just like a regular job. And
immersion, yeah.
It works so well. It's really amazing to me to see. And I know that some of them are close to me in age, and it's interesting because I get emotional sometimes thinking about it just to see how much they progress so quickly. And I do a design workshop for the young coders. And I'm not trying to teach them to be designers. Some of them actually do want to design, but it's really more about training their eye. So that way, when they do become a front-end developer, they know what things are supposed to look like. But the coding academies on the whole, it's such a great program because it allows those young people to be part of the career track that they may have never considered before. It's really astounding because they might be going from a minimum wage job into a job that probably starts at $40,000 a year. And it's such a huge shift to go from one end to the other in just 11 months at completely no cost to them. And it's a new way of thinking about education. And it really bothers me when people tend to think that a degree is the only way. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that everyone learns differently. Everyone has different paths in their life. And sometimes you need it. And I would say every time you need to do what's good for you. You need to have the path that suits you in your life. And there's no one size fits all in anything.
Yeah, I've got a hashtag that I use whenever we talk to somebody without a degree, and it's hire the person, not the paper. Because just like you said, that is a total immersion program, like learning a foreign language, going to another country. And I will say this, I have a friend that is a special ed teacher. And she said that part of the reason for some of the difficulty that children have learning is that now they're growing up with a device in their hand. So when my generation was growing up, we were taught to read left to right, top to bottom. And in the digital experience, especially with computer games and stuff, kids are firing. Their eyes are all over the page in very different places. And they've learned that, they haven't learned that scanning ability that you have with reading. And it causes some of those reading problems for kids because you have to really train the brain to do that. And so just like you said in the design class that you teach, you really have to train your eye to do things that it may not be intuitively doing.
No, that's totally true. And I think the barrier with design is people, they just think it's all about art. And when I try to teach people how to kind of train their eye, they only think about the execution part. They say, well, I can't draw. Well, I can't do this. Well, I can't do that. And I'm saying, okay, well, you can look at things. You can observe. You can notice patterns. It's really just about training your eyes and your brain to see those different things. And I would say that if we took more time to teach things on a level that everyone understood, then it wouldn't be such a huge thing. I would say not only do we neglect technology in education, we also neglect art. Arts are always the first thing to be cut. And it has a profound impact on how we view life, how it shapes the way we think. I haven't had as much time to advocate for that as well, but I think both are equally important. We not only need to learn how to use, technology and have logical and critical thinking skills, we also need to know how to be creative because it's the creative solutions that move things forward.
What's the whole other side of your brain?
It is. And people always like to tell me, it's like, well, I don't use that part of my brain. And I don't know how much I believe in the left and right brains anymore, just because to me that only implies that we use like one half of our brain at any given time. It's a muscle that you just have to use like anything else. It's like training for a triathlon. You don't just wake up one day and say, all right, I'm going to go run a triathlon now. Train for it. You study it. You learn the best techniques. It's just like anything else. So, I would love to be able to kind of bring a similar program for design to the local area because there is a huge, huge demand for developers. And as there should be, because we need them. But I always want to make sure that the design part is not neglected. And I would say that I know more developers locally than I do designers. And to me, that's a problem. Just haven't quite figured out how to fix that yet.
Well, that's part of the reason for this podcast series. We're trying to bring awareness to, all of the different careers, because if people aren't exposed to them, it's not even in their frame of reference. And we've heard that time and time again on this program that, kids have to be exposed at a very young age. And even people that are getting older, there's this big misnomer that in order to be in tech, you have to be a coder. And that really couldn't be farther from the truth. We've talked to people in construction. We've talked to construction managers. We've talked to people that do piping. We've talked to electricians. We talked to the people that draw the buildings, and then, all the way through the different coding. And that's certainly one path to a degree, design being another one now that we're talking to you. But there's lots of paths in this industry. And the nice thing about this industry is that it changes so fast, which is my favorite part about it, because there's always something new, always something to learn. But if you don't like what you're doing in any job, you can sort of turn to the left, turn to the right, and figure out 22 other things that you could do. If you don't like one programming language, like you were talking about earlier, there is a big push to no code, and having these programs that handle all the behind the scenes stuff. The first coding class that I took, you literally had to tell the computer, to move a piece of, to move something in and out of memory and to wipe it out and start over with another piece and do your add functions. And it was so tedious. And then the next language I learned, you didn't have to do that. You just sort of did it by using words instead of, you could use words that would do a bigger sweeping function, And then we've just gotten better and better and better on the coding side, being able to do exactly what you're doing, a lot of the no code stuff that it does what you need it to do.
Mm-hmm. And so what I find though, is it's interesting because not only in college was I a designer, I was also a computer lab assistant. So after hours, I would assist fellow art students because my background is, I had a very full fine arts approach to design. So in college, we did a little bit of everything. So that meant I was not just around other designers all day. I was also around students who were specializing in painting or drawing or ceramics or photography. And what I found, especially in creatives, there was a huge technological skill gap in how to use computers and printers. They would sit down to do a project. We were all required to take a computers and art class. And they struggled so much, not just because, it's a new piece of equipment that you have to use, but they were so afraid because, they had this mental wall that said, well, I can't do this. I'm just going to sit here and stare at the screen because I can't figure this out. And I found that it was so interesting that the creative people struggled the most because they had worked so hard on developing those creative skills. But when it came to the technological part, they were freaked out. And I tried to spend a lot of time to kind of dismantle that as a barrier, because they would just look at it and be overwhelmed. But, like I said, it's just a muscle that you have to work. And I would say that the opposite is true for those who are very technical. You look at art and creative things and your brain just kind of spazzes out for a second. And you're just like, nope, I'm not going to do this. and you just kind of check out. So
yeah, it is a little bit different thought process for sure. But certainly not anything to be afraid of. And I think you brought up a really great point. Fear can make you not want to do a lot of things, because once you're afraid, your brain sort of shuts down and it doesn't want to process that anymore. It really does. I think if you sit down at a task with the thought that I can't do this or I'm afraid to do this, then you close off the part of your brain that really is open to learning new things. And that's never a good thing. And sometimes it just takes somebody to sit down and explain it a different way. I had my old CEO called me the queen of analogies because he hated tech, absolutely hated tech, but he knew it was necessary. And so if there was a problem and nobody could explain it to him, he'd call me up in the office and say, all right, I need this sorted out, Carrie. Tell me what this is doing where I can understand it. And I would figure out some way to explain it. I might have to go through a couple analogies, but once he got the gist of it, then he was happy and it was good. So I think being able to, like you said, get something in somebody's frame of reference where it is a little less scary and you sort of, start at a little puddle, like a drop in water, and ripples out a little farther and ripples out a little farther. And next thing you know, you've learned something new.
Right, exactly. And, to your point, I've been exposed to these things my entire life, so it doesn't really scare me. Of course, there are some things that scare me with technology, such as backend. Don't ask me to transfer a website. Make somebody else do it. But, we kind of just have to expose people at a young age. And, that's what the Bean Path is all about. And I would say the issue, as we've talked about previously, is kind of making sure that not only do we make sure that everybody has access to technology, that we also address the profound gender gap in technology. And I would say design too. I didn't realize how bad this was because I went to Mississippi University for Women, where it is 80% women. So it didn't occur to me until I started getting out into the world and applying for jobs and being a part of local groups that it is largely male driven. And I think a lot of it is not necessarily fear, but, there's no attempt for inclusion. And I would say that that's another huge part of my life, is trying to make sure that we address that. And that's why I started Women of Design and Tech in the first place, was because I saw that there was a need and I saw there was a gap. And, it's just about making sure that those voices are heard.
Absolutely. And we've dedicated a lot of this podcast just to that, because there is a huge gap, and the attrition rate for women in technology is terrible. It's like 67%. We need to be more supportive. And I will say that I think coming out of this current situation, that there is going to be a little bit different mentality on the part of employers, in that, if you can work at home, work at home. And so many employers have really not embraced that, which has made it really tough for a lot of women that sick kids or whatever and can't go in that day. Now they actually have a path to be able to work at home. So I really hope coming out of this, we see some change. But I also think just what you're doing at the Bean Path and exposing girls at a younger age to this as a possible career is certainly huge, because you don't necessarily have to be great at math. You're a perfect example in that you've gone on the creative side of coding, and you still are very productive in tech and do a really great job at what you do without having to be really great at math.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually not very good at math at all. And I think it is just a fear thing, because I haven't developed that part of my brain very well. So I'm that person who will admit that math scares me. I can remember in school that if I saw a bunch of equations, my brain would just kind of shut down. And I think a lot of it has to do is I felt pressured for time to get that stuff done, because in testing, you only have a certain amount of time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not good at math at all. My husband's a software engineer. He's not great at math either. So, it just goes to show that just because someone says you need a certain skill to do something, that's not always the case. And, math, of course, is another, any STEM field really is another area where women, they're just not represented, or they're discouraged, or it's hard for them to get entry to the industry. There's so many factors. But to your point, especially when women aren't having careers in technology, we still haven't addressed the gender gap. We haven't really addressed the gender gap in how women are primarily responsible for childcare, and flexible working options is a good answer to that. It's not the end all be all, but it's just the start. And it will be interesting to see kind of where we go from here. And I think that any company that digs their heels in and said, well, we offered remote work, during this time period, but we're not going to offer it anymore, is going to have a much harder time with employee retention. And they're going to find it very difficult to find talent as they grow as a company. So I would say that this is a good time for companies to evaluate where they are in offering remote work options, not just, for women who I do know that it definitely helps close the gap, but for everyone, especially those who may be disabled or need more accessible technology. I think this is a good time for everyone to realize, hey, we need to pivot and make sure we're more inclusive. I think Twitter actually went completely remote. They don't even have an office anymore.
Well, they did, yeah, during this. They've said that going forward, they're going to allow their folks to work remotely. A couple of the other tech giants have done that too. It'll be interesting to see, I think, how all that shakes out. But talking about the immersion programming classes and, like you said about not being good at math, why would we force somebody to sit through a bunch of classes that torture them when they could be productive in something like an 11-month immersion class, and then they have really honed and crafted a skill that they can use moving forward. And I think that's something else we're going to see, especially with, the fact that a lot of the universities have gone remote and student debt being what it is. Kids are taking on massive debt. And the other side of that is these kids that are getting out with massive debt have very little loyalty to their employers, and it's all about making money so they can get that paid off. And they're expecting a very different work life because they've had access to technology, and because they've worked and honed a skill. If they can't find it with an employer, they'll just go do it on their own.
No, I agree. That's so true, and it will be interesting as for that as well, as students start to graduate after having been completely remote, some 100% for their classes. It will be interesting to see kind of how that changes the landscape of universities and higher education, because I've seen it mentioned quite frequently to say, okay, well, now all of my classes are online, but I'm still being charged the same amount of tuition, because we all know that tuition is not just for the class itself. It's a lot of administrative fees. It's for a lot of campus offerings. So how were you able to now justify those expenses? Charging the same amount of tuition as you would for going completely online as you would being on campus. So that will be very interesting to see the change in universities. And I hope that they'll evolve and kind of go with the flow, but who knows?
Yeah, I think they absolutely. And I think that we're probably going to see more and more like University of Phoenix and some of the others that are offering purely online experiences. And, the good thing about that, I think, is some of that competition will drive down the cost. And of course, part of what you pay for when you pay for a college is the prestige of having graduated from a certain college. So, you might have exposure to different professors, and some might be better than others, but the idea is that you get the skills that you need to get out with. And I think, there's some that are always going to be degreed. Engineering is one of a great example, architecture, things like that, where you can justify the degrees. But I do think that we're going to see more, design would be a good subject, to have some more of those immersion-based degree programs, or at least diploma programs, where you can stick with what you love and not necessarily have to take all of the stuff that, doesn't contribute to your mental health, like math for you, right?
I totally agree. I always tell people, I did the traditional path. I did do 5 years of college, but I did not love every second of it. And up until college, I was a terrible student. I just didn't care about classes. I didn't really want to go. It just wasn't my thing. I didn't care about school until college, because a huge portion of my college life was devoted to my major, which of course was design. And when I wasn't in the art building doing what I love to do best, I was miserable. I hated to have to schlep across campus to go to a science class that I didn't care about, that I was being forced to take. But I worked at it, because if I didn't, I would lose my art scholarship. So I had to. So I just want people to remember that, even if you were a bad student at one point in your life, I think that it can really change your life if you find something you care about. And if you see a change in yourself when you find something you care about, then I think that's when you found the right thing. Who I am as a person didn't happen overnight. I didn't become a really dedicated worker and career person until I found something that I actually cared about. And I would say that the college experience does not always lend itself to that, because you are forced to take so many classes that I understand are important, but don't really contribute to your overall career of choice. I took chemistry because I had to, and I barely got out of there. I'm not experienced what I do at all. So I just hope that, we do have more programs where we can kind of focus on what we are, not only what do we like to do, but what are we good at and what does society need? Which kind of brings me to the point of ikigai. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It's a concept where you kind of make a Venn diagram. I think it's a Japanese concept where you think about, what do I love? What do I'm good at? What does the world need? What can I get paid for? And where all of those intersect is kind of what you should be doing. And to me, I'm a big believer in that, because I believe that all of us are good at something, and we can all do something that contributes to society. But we have to be able to find out what that is. And of course, if you're in college and you have to pick a major, you kind of have to stick with it to get a degree at the end out of it. So I think that we should all try to take some time to experiment and find out what that is. And if college is not the answer, then, don't do it.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of different opinions, but, certainly I think a degree gets you a lot of well-rounded skills so you can find out what you do like and what you don't like. And it may be that you hated history in school, but once you take it in college, it becomes a very different curriculum and all of a sudden you really like it. So I think there's a lot to be said for that exposure. There's a lot to be said for taking English classes so that you can clearly communicate to others, for taking, basic math. So, when problems do come up and you have to figure out how, like in your world, to divide screens up or whatever, that part of math is good. Now, that does not to say that you need differential equations for what you're doing. But I think, some people really love that. Some people, I personally love math. I think that was one of my strong suits in school. I sailed through it, but there was pieces I didn't love. I did not love biology. And so I think the exposure certainly is a good thing. But, to your point where you find that passion, one of the most listened to episode of this podcast was really talking about certifications and how there's such a great boost into a new career, or certainly, a better boost into the career, because there's a lot of people in tech, for instance, that don't have degrees in tech. They have liberal arts degrees or degrees in something that have nothing to do with tech, but they've decided they enjoy it. So they go get certified, and now they have the trifecta. They've got the degree, they've got a certification, and they've got a willingness to learn and work on a job, and they found something that they're passionate about. So even whether you complete a degree or not, I think certifications certainly are a way to add a boost to that and help get you to that trifecta that you were talking about. What does the world need? Where can I make money? And what do I enjoy?
Mm-hmm. No, yes, I agree. Certifications, I think, especially when involving certain industries in tech and especially in coding, I think those can be a step up. It's interesting, though, because I don't feel the same in design is true. I feel like, getting certifications for like a general program, like web design or graphic design, I think can be helpful. But I think once you get to a certain point, it doesn't help you anymore. And that's just my opinion. I would say that a lot of what I would say as far as design goes, it really comes down to, do you make good work and who have you worked with? What companies have you worked for? Which clients have you collaborated with? And I think that holds a lot of weight as well. So, it's interesting to see across industries, what serves one part does not serve all.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, and because you're talking about a portfolio, obviously. A lot of the young women that I mentor, I tell them, starting today, if you do something you're proud of and you feel it's an accomplishment, keep a log.
Yes.
Because 10 years from now, you're not going to be able to go back and remember what you did and when you did it. Like, I'm terrible at dates in the past. I'll be the first to admit I'm horrible. If I can look it up or figure it out a different way, I'm awful at dates in the past. I don't just remember that like a lot of people do. My stepdaughter's really good at that. I'm horrible. But keeping those logs of accomplishments. And then, the other thing that does is when you're having a down day or you just feel like stuff's not going right, you can go back and read over those things. And sometimes, maybe it's 5 or 6 years down the road in your career, you'll see that pattern that you were talking about earlier. And you'll see, I really felt good when I did this and I did this and I did this. And maybe I need to shift my gears a little bit and start focusing on the stuff that truly brought me joy.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, that is so true. And in design, there's a humongous push for everyone to niche down. And I also believe in that, because there were many things that I was doing that because I felt like I had to, such as, for example, like ads, social graphics. I hate those things. So I do not that is a service. What really brings me joy is kind of untangling messy problems or messy visual assets and reforming them into something that's beautiful and polished. And often that is very big projects. My background is actually in publication design. That was my first job out of college. And my first project was 1,000-page catalog with like 10,000 parts in it. I was 23 years old, and that was my first job. And I didn't realize how much joy it brought me to make sense out of chaos. I didn't realize how much chaos affected me. And so that's what I like to do is I like to work on big projects that just require a lot of patience, and you kind of have to just sit there and whittle away. So, I would, to any young designer, I would say, if they're listening, don't be afraid to niche down, because that's where you can become a true expert. And niching down ensures that you only kind of work on things that are in your wheelhouse that you like to do. And not to mention, you can charge more.
There you go. There you go. Well, we're running about out of time. So if you could leave anybody with parting words, and I'll make sure that everybody has Natalie's contact information in the podcast description. But again, her company is Pixetal Studio, and that's Pixetal. But if you want to leave anybody with some parting words.
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say my mantra has always been put on some pants and get out of the house. And that's for everyone. But I would say, now that we are all stuck at home, I would say, put on some pants and show up. If you're trying to accomplish anything, if you're trying to change careers, if you're trying to get into a new industry, just make sure you show up. And I promise with enough persistence, you'll get there, whatever your goal is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Natalie. This has really been insightful, and I'm sure that people will enjoy it. And for the rest of you listening, we look forward to hosting you on another edition of our podcast series. Thanks.